Ladies and gentlemen, the International Institute for Strategic Studies that is now in its 60th year. In November, we celebrated our 60th anniversary, has had a long tradition of engaging with defense ministers and military staffs, and so we have absorbed the culture of punctuality that is typical of those professions. And since many of you here are in the defense and military worlds, I trust that you will now also show the discipline needed to take your seats and allow us to begin within a minute of the starting time of 8:30 this first plenary of the 18th IISS Shangri-La Dialogue. In the celebrated phrase, we have a rich and packed agenda this morning with over half a dozen ministers of defense and foreign policy leaders addressing us before lunchtime. And I think it will be important not only to hear their prepared remarks, but also to ensure that there is a conversation amongst us that helps advance the purposes of this dialogue. So those of you who are in conversation, I hope you will bring those conversations briskly to an end so that we are able to start. And I would like to begin by thanking the Prime Minister of Singapore, Lee Hsien Loong, for a really splendid speech last night at our opening dinner. That keynote address set charismatically the agenda for this 18th Shangri-La Dialogue. And I hope you will agree that the exchange of views from the floor, questions posed and answers given, displayed a frankness and intellectual vigor that is characteristic of this dialogue. His speech is on the IISS website. It's equally very well reported in today's Straits Times. It has a few pages of coverage of the Shangri-La Dialogue, and in particular of yesterday evening's activities. May I remind you that all the speeches and remarks made from this podium are on the record. It's equally the case that the questions and comments made from the floor are on the record, and so I would ask those who are asking questions to exercise the same discipline of intellectual coherence and succinct expression as we would expect from the speakers if you are to maintain your own reputations. So do be brief and end your third sentence with a question mark so that we can include as many people as possible. If you wish to seek the floor, we are here at the IISS very technologically advanced. So there are only two things that you need to do. The first is to put your badge in the right slot of the microphone that each of you have in front of you. And if you wish to take the floor, you press the button on the right. That will not mean that your microphone is on. It will only mean that your name appears in the queue. So you can put your badge in the right-hand side of the microphone set now. If at any time you are interested in having my attention, please press the button on the right. I have the supreme authority here to put your microphone on and indeed to turn it off. So don't worry if you have pressed the button. If you want to whisper something indiscreet to your neighbor, unhappily, we won't all hear it here, but at least that discretion will be preserved. So those are the two steps. Your instructions are on the table. And I'd now like to formally open the first plenary of this 18th Shangri-La Dialogue. It's a real delight to have with us Patrick Shanahan. From the beginning of this Shangri-La Dialogue process in 2002, every U.S. Secretary of Defense since Donald Rumsfeld has addressed this Shangri-La Dialogue. Patrick Shanahan had a splendid career in defense industry, had a distinguished academic record at MIT and at the Sloan School of Management, was the 33rd Deputy Secretary of Defense, and it's a real pleasure for me to invite him to take the podium and address us on the U.S. vision for Indo-Pacific security. Secretary Shanahan.
You got a full house here. Good, good. Thank you, Dr. Chipman and the IISS team for organizing this conference. I especially want to thank Dr. Ung for our gracious host here in Singapore. It's good to be back. I visited Singapore many times while working in private industry, and I'm honored to join you today as the Acting Secretary of Defense. As Prime Minister Lee said last night, the United States is welcome and has many friends in Asia. This is a real honor, and I would say that the United States has no better friend in Asia than Singapore. On behalf of the President and the Commander-in-Chief Trump, and the men and women of the United States Armed Forces, I am here to reaffirm the United States' enduring commitment to the Indo-Pacific region and to the values that keep it secure and prosperous, free and open. The United States has a natural presence here. As Secretary Mattis said from this podium last year, we are a Pacific nation. We are a resident power with deep economic, cultural, and personal connections that inextricably link us with the growth and vitality of the world's most dynamic region. Our shared geography has spurred the integration and linkage of our economies. America's annual two-way trade here is $2.3 trillion, and U.S. foreign direct investment is $1.3 trillion, more than China's, Japan's, and South Korea's combined. Our defense ties are similarly strong. We have a long history of engagement, and we have a strong, long-standing relationships from our 5 treaty alliances to our large and growing number of defense partners. Our defense relationships have expanded along with this region's prosperity. And as our own economic interests have increased, and this region's prosperity has increased by the stabilizing influence of our defense relationships. So the synergy between prosperity and security is well understood. With that linkage in mind, I am pleased to have this opportunity to describe the very real progress the Department of Defense is making to usher in a new age of technology, partnerships, and posture that presents an unprecedented opportunity for our Indo-Pacific network of allies and partners. Standing here today, we are nearly 3 years into this significant undertaking. In spite of a very dynamic world, we are focused. We have continuity, and this continuity is propelling us forward. Our direction is unambiguous, and our efforts are captured in our National Defense Strategy and the Indo-Pacific Strategy Report, which describes how we are implementing the strategy in this region. These are important documents, and they capture many headlines. The strategy is much more than words. The strategy underpins the department's budget and drives our resourcing. We have more than a strategy, we have a plan. In this context, it is important to recognize the heavy lifting done by our Congress, which has shown extraordinary bipartisan support to provide the Department of Defense with the resources needed to execute our defense strategy. Congress did not just remove the budget caps limiting our efforts, they have fully funded our defense strategy. Their contribution is significant, and many have made the long journey here to be with us today. I'd like to recognize them. House Armed Services Committee Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Thornberry, Representatives Larson, Norcross and Brown, Senator King, Gardner, Duckworth, and Blackburn. I thank them for their vital support to our national defense strategy, and I can personally speak to their engagement. I truly appreciate all the help. Congress's focus is global and regional, and this region in particular will benefit from their passage of the bipartisan Better Utilization of Investment Leading to Development, or BUILD Act, which President Trump signed into law last October. The BUILD Act establishes a new U.S. International Development Finance Corporation that will prioritize low and middle-income countries. Through it, we will more than double U.S. development finance capacity from $29 billion to $60 billion, helping to unlock the potential of private capital to support high-quality, high-standard, transparent investments to better service infrastructure needs across the region and the world. On the security side, the importance of congressional support to the Department of Defense is hard to overstate. It has enabled us to fully resource our strategy without artificial constraints created by budget pressures. Equally as important, we are aligned across the Department of Defense, the single largest employer in the United States. The more than 3 million men and women of our department are singularly focused and aligned behind this strategy, not just my staff, but also in the services, the Joint Staff and the combatant commands. We are undertaking a significant modernization effort which is underpinned by innovation, experimentation, and new technology that will allow us to combat new threats, to strengthen our alliances and build new partnerships by allowing us to communicate and share at speed. This is a massive effort. The United States is the world's largest economy, and the defense budget is 60% of our discretionary spending. Our government is devoting significant resources to this mission. And our geographic focus, the priority theater of our strategy, is right here in the Indo-Pacific. This represents an enormous opportunity for our allies and partners. The United States is rapidly developing the technologies critical to deterring and defeating the threats of the future. Partners who pursue interoperability with us as part of a regional security network will be able to access much of these technologies and benefit from the compounding effects of U.S. investments and progress. Going forward, we should seek to grow, integrate, and realize these synergies as we build regional security network together that is inclusive and resilient, based on trust, and which upholds a free and open Indo-Pacific. If I can speak personally for a moment, like Secretary Mattis, I grew up in Washington State on the Pacific Coast. My formative experiences over a 30-year career in the Boeing Company were heavily influenced by my work with partners across this region, including Japan, South Korea, China, and Singapore, among others. I learned firsthand the immense value of relationships. That trust is built over time, through actions as well as words. If I can offer an analogy, in the past, I worked on teams that designed and manufactured airplanes and sourced and assembled parts from dozens of nations across this region. Each nation's business arrangement was different. One size did not fit all. It was complex work, and every country in the supply chain made a unique contribution that matched their capability and ambition. No one nation could do it all. But by working together, we created something larger than the sum of the parts. Today, this collective gathering, we are building a shared security order. Every nation, independent of size, has an opportunity and an important role to play. And like the business of building airplanes, no one nation can go it alone. No one nation can or should dominate the Indo-Pacific. It is in all our interests to work together to build a shared future, one that is better than anything any of our nations could achieve on our own. Whether airplanes or security architectures, you start with a blueprint, a guide that ensures everyone's contributions fit together. The United States blueprint for the region is a free and open Indo-Pacific. Many regional nations have advanced similar plans, and we welcome those. The free and open Indo-Pacific vision is an effective guide for regional contributions because it is based on enduring principles of international cooperation. Respect for sovereignty and independence of all nations, large and small. Peaceful resolution of disputes. Free, fair, and reciprocal trade and investment, which includes protection of intellectual property and adherence to international rules and norms, including freedom of navigation and overflight. These are not American principles. They are broadly accepted across this region and the world. We know these principles are valuable because we have seen the damage that erupts when they are ignored. We also know from history that following these principles leads to greater security and increased prosperity. It has already happened here, where a regional order based on these principles spurred decades of growth, lifting billions out of poverty and transforming the Indo-Pacific into the world's most dynamic region. We know the interdependence of security and economics, that economic security is national security. That's why we want the Indo-Pacific to remain free and open, because it allows countries to prosper, and prosperous countries are stable and capable of contributing to regional security and stability. For this reason, the United States does not want any country in this region to have to choose or forego positive economic relations with any partner. Expanding prosperity is vital for all of us. This region has experienced an unprecedented 70 years of relative peace and rising prosperity, supported by steady American engagements in all spheres. However, some in our region are choosing to act contrary to the principles and norms that have benefited us all. I want to use some of our time together this morning to take stock of pressures on the regional order and their implications. Acknowledging those actions is not enough. We also need to extrapolate the trend line and recognize the likely future we arrive at if we do not act to call out disruptive actors and take a stand against the challenges to regional order. The challenges are significant. We are focused on negotiations to achieve a final, fully verified denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We acknowledge that North Korea has neared a point where it could credibly strike regional allies, U.S. territory, and our forward deployed forces. North Korea remains an extraordinary threat and requires continued vigilance. A full range of transnational challenges persists. Attacks by militants affiliated with or inspired by ISIS, as seen in Sri Lanka's deadly Easter Sunday bombings, and other international terrorist groups, proliferation, narcotics, natural disasters, and disease. Perhaps the greatest long-term threat to the vital interests of the states across the region comes from actors who seek to undermine rather than uphold the rules-based international order. These actors undermine the system by using indirect, incremental actions and rhetorical devices to exploit others economically and diplomatically, and coerce them militarily. They destabilize the region, seeking to reorder its vibrant and diverse communities toward their exclusive advantage. We see this manifested in a range of behaviors and activities throughout the Indo-Pacific. A toolkit of coercion to include deploying advanced weapons systems to militarize disputed areas, destabilizing the peaceful status quo by threatening the use of force to compel rivals into conceding claims, using influence operations to interfere in the domestic politics of other nations, undermining the integrity of elections and threatening internal stability, engaging in predatory economics and debt sovereignty deals, lubricated by corruption which take advantage of pressing economic needs to structure unequal bargains and disproportionately benefit one party, and promoting state-sponsored theft of other nations' military and civilian technology. In contrast to a free and open vision broadly shared by the region, some seem to want a future where power determines place and debt determines destiny, where nations are unable to make use of natural resources within their exclusive economic zones, where coral reefs are dredged and destroyed with disastrous ecological and economic consequences, where fishermen's livelihoods are in peril as they are denied access to waters they and their ancestors have fished for generations, where freedom of navigation and international overflight are restricted, and where the fundamental respect for the dignity of all people is ignored and religious freedoms are suppressed. If these trends and these behaviors continue, artificial features in the global commons could become toll booths. Sovereignty could become the purview of the powerful. When a country makes a pledge and does not follow it, you should worry. When that same country makes no pledge, you should really worry. We can't wish away reality or continue to look the other way as countries use friendly rhetoric to distract from unfriendly acts. Now is the time to call out the mismatch between words and deeds by some in the region and encourage them to work constructively and transparently towards a positive future. The United States rejects those actions that run counter to the order that many of the countries represented in this room have built together. We want a different future, a more promising future, one where small nations need not fear larger neighbors. And the U.S. Department of Defense is working systematically to deliver it. What is the United States' view of the future? In our Indo-Pacific vision, respected partners find security and prosperity in a network of interconnected peoples, economies, and security relationships. This is not new nor exclusively an American vision. This is an inclusive, enduring approach, embraced by almost all of us who call the Indo-Pacific home. What is the value we create from this interconnected, networked future? Nations are empowered through their relationship with the United States and others in a common bond. They remain free to choose their destiny as strategic partners, exercising strategic independence. Regional institutions like ASEAN retain their centrality. They remain able to unify diverse interests, pool resources, and contribute to a shared future. In short, the region's shared principles are upheld by countries coming together of their own accord to support regional security and stability. This approach is in keeping with America's long history of working together with allies and partners in this region to defend a rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific. Many of us stood together against imperialism, fascism, and the Soviet domination in decades past. In many of these instances, China stood with us as a cooperative partner in pursuit of shared goals. I say now that China could still have a cooperative relationship with the United States. It is in China's interests to do so. No country has benefited more from the regional and global order than China, which has seen hundreds of millions lifted from poverty to increasing prosperity. We cooperate with China where we have an alignment of interests, from military to military dialogue to develop risk reduction measures, to tackling transnational threats such as counter-piracy, to enforcing UN sanctions on North Korea. And we compete with China where we must. But competition does not mean conflict. Competition is not to be feared. We should welcome it, provided that everyone plays by internationally established rules. China can and should have a cooperative relationship with the rest of the region too. But behavior that erodes other nations' sovereignty and sows distrust of China's intentions must end. Until it does, we stand against a myopic, narrow, and parochial view of the future, and we stand for a free and open order that has benefited us all, including China. At the Department of Defense, we are making this vision a reality by focusing our investments on preparedness, strengthening our allies and partnerships, and empowering a regional security network. For that network to thrive, we need all to seek to derive a benefit from what it contributed to their, For that network to thrive, we need all who seek to derive a benefit from it to contribute their part. When we talk about preparedness, we mean having the right capabilities in the right places to respond to crises and to compete with and deter high-end adversaries. The United States does not seek conflict, but we know that having the capability to win wars is the best way to deter them. We want to ensure no adversary believes it can successfully achieve political objectives through military force. To that end, as part of a broader department-wide modernization, the U.S. Department of Defense is investing significantly in the next 5 years in programs critical to ensuring a stable and secure Indo-Pacific. This is a major step to technologically scale capability and capacity on behalf of our security and yours. For example, we are increasing investments in contested domains like space and cyber while preserving our advantages in undersea warfare, tactical aircraft, C4ISR, and missile defense to ensure the commons remain open to all in the Indo-Pacific. We are focused on the future in our request of $104 billion, the most ever, in research and development in the next fiscal year, with significant investment in emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, hypersonics, and directed energy, much of which is aimed at the unique challenges in this theater. We've also spent the last 2 years focused on restoring the readiness of our forces. We continue to build on these gains with $125 billion in operational readiness and sustainment requested in the next fiscal year. This funding will boost the depth and capacity of our armed forces and also help expand our training, including with allies and partners, to improve mission readiness critical to meeting the region's challenges. These funds will enhance our already sizable and reliable capabilities distributed across the region. More than 370,000 American soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and civilians live, train, and work alongside our allied and partner forces across the region. U.S. Indo-Pacific Command has 4 times the assigned forces than any other geographic combatant command. Across the Indo-Pacific, the United States has more than 2,000 aircraft, providing the ability to rapidly project power across the vast distances of this region. More than 200 ships and submarines ensure freedom of navigation, search and rescue, and rapid assistance in the event of natural disasters. We are investing in advanced missile defense systems, interoperable with allied systems in Japan, Australia, and South Korea. Our security guarantees are reinforced thanks to strategic enhancements like our Columbia-class ballistic missile submarines and our purchase of 110 fourth and fifth-generation aircraft and advanced munitions. Our acquisition of 10 new destroyers will increase anti-surface and anti-submarine warfare capabilities, and ballistic missile defense, ensuring our forces and those of our allies and partners remain safe in a turbulent world. We're also accelerating forward presence of U.S. land forces to deepen real operational relationships with those allies and partners. We're expanding into space along allies, Australia and Japan. This has been an opportunity to station some of our highest end, most capable assets in the Indo-Pacific, right where they belong. To reiterate, the Indo-Pacific is our priority theater. We are where we belong. We are investing in this region. We are investing in you and with you. And we need you to invest further in yourselves. We need you to invest in ways that take more control over your sovereignty and your ability to exercise sovereign choices. Every nation has a responsibility in a free and open Indo-Pacific. The United States will uphold our commitments, and we need our allies and partners to contribute their fair share. We need you to invest sufficiently in your own defense. It strengthens deterrence. Build third-party capacity. It helps the network scale. Uphold rules-based international order. It keeps the playing field level. Provide access to address contingencies. It makes us more responsive. Strengthen interoperability and think carefully about the implication of defense sales. You are buying a long-term relationship, not just a platform. Expand information sharing with like-minded countries and ensure your own networks are secure and trusted by others. It keeps us connected. Pool resources for common objectives. It distributes the weight. As you invest in yourself, know that we are strengthening even further our unrivaled network of alliances and partnerships. We know this region's size and complexity requires the greatest degree of cooperation. As we know, we are up to the challenge. No other nation can match the United States' ability to work across distance, cultures, language, and time. And we are increasing the rate at which we do this. Global participation in our combined military exercises increased 17% in the last 2 years. This region has benefited immensely from it. An excellent example can be found in last month's La Pérouse exercise in the Indian Ocean. The U.S. Navy drilled alongside the French aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle, Japanese helicopter Zumo and destroyer Murasama, and the Australian frigate Toowoomba and submarine Collins. Who else can bring together militaries otherwise separated by 3 oceans and 9,000 kilometers? This is just one vignette out of thousands. Project this training, interoperability, and shared capability across the full scope of exercises, and you'll find that our mutually beneficial alliances and partnerships give durable, asymmetric advantage that no competitor can match. Let me give you a brief snapshot of some of these capabilities. Japan hosts our 7th Fleet and 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force, the U.S. Ronald Reagan, and our only forward-deployed aircraft carrier. Ballistic missile defense assets, including Aegis destroyers and Patriot units, and more than 54,000 military personnel. This capability enables unparalleled operational cooperation and lets us provide strength together in support of regional stability. South Korea hosts 28,500 U.S. service members, 2 fighter wings of F-16 and A-10 aircraft, and a host of other forces, including Terminal High Altitude Area Defense Battery. Together, we deter aggression on the Korean Peninsula, support the path to diplomacy to achieve the final, fully verified denuclearization of North Korea, and uphold the international rule of law. With the Philippines, we have 280 bilateral defense activities planned for 2019 alone. Our flagship exercise, Balakatan, this year incorporated 5th-generation F-35 fighters for the first time. We also rotate U.S. troops through the southern Philippines to help allies combat terrorism. With Australia, we are pushing the sophistication of our alliance capabilities through our Enhanced Aircraft Cooperation Initiative and Marine Rotational Forces Darwin. These initiatives enable our alliance to deepen interoperability and expand our cooperative capacity in our home region, just as the alliance has contributed to shared objectives for decades. Thailand continues to host Exercise Cobra Gold, the largest multilateral exercise in the Indo-Pacific. And we are working with Congress following the recent Thai elections to fully return our defense cooperation to the levels appropriate for our longest-standing treaty partner in Asia. Let me briefly highlight some other work we are doing with our committed partners. U.S.-India defense relations have strengthened significantly over the past decade, and now India is a major defense partner. We are increasing the scope, complexity, and frequency of our military engagements to include our first tri-service exercise later this year. The signing of the Communications Compatibility and Security Agreement, or COMCASA, last year was a historic development that enables us to further expand our relationship toward more practical and meaningful areas of cooperation. This includes greater interoperability and information sharing. I visited Indonesia earlier this week and was impressed by the strength of our strategic partnership in the world's third largest democracy. The United States and Indonesia have an active exercise program that includes more than 200 bilateral military engagements annually, and our interoperability is enhanced by common platforms such as the F-16 fighters and Apache attack helicopters. Singapore is a steadfast U.S. partner in Southeast Asia with a strong commitment to promoting regional and global stability. Singapore is our only major security cooperation partner in the region and provides valuable access to U.S. Navy ships and U.S. military aircraft whose presence contributes to security and stability in the region. And we are glad to have Singapore's fighter aircraft train alongside our U.S. Air Force. The U.S. and Mongolia have a comprehensive partnership based on common values and shared strategic interests. Mongolia is a net security exporter, upholding a free and open Indo-Pacific, enforcing U.S. Security Council resolutions to denuclearize North Korea, and contributing to coalition operations in Afghanistan and U.S. peacekeeping operations. I was proud to host my Mongolian counterpart at the Pentagon earlier this year. We continue to meet our obligations under the Taiwan Relations Act to make defense articles and defense services available to Taiwan for self-defense. This support empowers the people of Taiwan to determine their own future. We maintain that any resolution of differences across the Taiwan Strait must occur in the absence of coercion and accord with the will of the people on both sides of the Taiwan Strait. Last week at the Pentagon, I hosted the presidents of Palau, the Federated States of Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands, who also met with President Trump at the White House for substantive discussions on furthering our unique relations. I appreciate the important role the freely associated states play in enforcing sanctions against North Korea, upholding a free and open Indo-Pacific, and enabling U.S. regional presence. So, for our trilateral relationships with Australia, Japan, and South Korea, to our work with Thailand co-organizing the ASEAN-U.S. maritime exercise scheduled for this September, we are building an interconnected Indo-Pacific. And while America works with allies within the region, we also leverage global alliances on behalf of the Indo-Pacific security. We welcome leadership from France, Canada, and the United Kingdom on asserting navigational rights and upholding the international rule of law. We also thank Germany and Spain for helping to enforce UN Security Council resolutions on North Korea. All this brings us together. We are building a cooperative regional security network that supports common goals. Whether maritime security, counterterrorism, counterproliferation, you name it, across shared domains and in defense of shared principles. This is what we're doing now, effectively working together to advance our mutual interests deter conflict, and support the stability that generates economic growth. Our defense relationships are already strong, and there could be a tendency to focus on incremental improvements to our existing cooperation. But I challenge us to look beyond the present and envision the possibilities of the future. We can and will do so much more. The new age of threats and technologies needed to meet them will allow for improved partnerships whose potential is beyond imagination. Now, we need to be pragmatic. Partnerships require trust to effectively solve problems together. Disagreements are okay and welcomed. The strength of our partnership is our ability to solve problems, not merely identify them. And we will resolve them in an inclusive, transparent fashion based on agreed upon rules. We will be successful. We are focused on the right priorities. We are postured for success. In my 30 years working with partners in the region, I've seen this region come together to solve tough problems. We can find solutions if we are truly committed to seeing a task through. It is said that grit is the ability to do something difficult for a prolonged period of time. We have grit. We've been working on this for 70 years. Our responsibility is to make this region more secure and prosperous for future generations. They expect, and we owe them, the same free and open Indo-Pacific that we have built and benefited from over the past 70 years. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, thank you very much. And I've got a number of people who are seeking the floor. Let me remind you that it is a two-step process. You have to put your card in the microphone deck and press the button. If your microphone turns green, don't worry. That just means you're in the queue, and I'll be able to turn it on. I'll take 4 or 5 questions in the first group, and the Secretary can reply to those. And if we have time, I'll take another group of 4 or 5. The first on which I will call is Lynn Kwok.
Thank you. Thank you for permitting me this question, Dr. Chipman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary. Now, the U.S. has voiced repeated concerns about the Belton Road Initiative. China launched the initiative 6 years ago in 2013. Since then, it's held 2 Belton Road forums attended by heads of states, the second just taking place two months ago. It's also signed numerous agreements with countries and begun, and in some cases, finished Belton Road projects. In response, the United States has passed the BUILD Act that took place late last year, but it's not clear that any sums under it have actually been appropriated. And the trilateral agreement on development finance collaboration with Japan and Australia has also not, to my knowledge, yielded any fruit. If economics is security, do you think that it might be too little, too late, too soon for giving the region options and for protecting U.S. interests in the region? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take a few, and then you can take them in a group. So,
Got it. Thank you. Josh Rogan, Washington Post. Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for your service. Like many in this room, I've been coming to this conference for many years. Each year, and every year, the U.S. Defense Secretary delivers a very similar speech, essentially saying the U.S. is an enduring presence in the region, and here's our strategy to make it so. Yet year after year, the Secretary needs to deliver the same speech because the region continues to doubt America's commitment and trajectory. Certainly under President Trump, these doubts remain, some in public, some in private. My question is, why do you think that's the case? And why do you think this latest iteration of the Indo-Pacific strategy that you're rolling out today can address these concerns once and for all? Thank you.
Yeah, hi, Josh. What do you all think of Josh's question? I think it's a good question.
Thank you. I try.
No, and I think I haven't. This is my first trip to the Shangri-La Dialogue, and what I wanted to do in this speech was not do what all the other previous secretaries have done. And I'm going to tell Secretary Mattis that my speech was as good as his. So thank you for he'll love that. It's hard to believe that all the speeches were the same. But if you asked me what's fundamentally different,
That's right.
because I think that's the underlying question, is the first and foremost, and that's why I put into my comments the support from Congress and the President. The fundamental resourcing of this strategy is different than in the past. In the past, we had strategies, we didn't have the resources and we didn't have the funding. So I think first and foremost, that's different. The second piece, and you know, I won't apologize for the way I framed some of my remarks, but we're not going to ignore Chinese behavior. Okay? I think in the past people have kind of tiptoed around that. It's not about being confrontational. It's about being open and having a dialogue. I've had a very good meeting last night with my counterpart, General Wei, and it's about having communication. So we need to kind of talk about the things that potentially can create problems in the region. So I wanted to talk about those specifically. And then I talked about the degree of engagement. I think our engagements are deeper and broader, and many of you know Admiral Davidson, who's here in the region, and he and I spend quite a bit of time, not just about how do we do more, but where are we prioritizing those engagements, and then how are we broadening our network with our allies and partners. So those are the three areas where I think fundamentally, if you were to measure the difference, people would look at those and say, this is a departure from what's been done in the past.
Thank you.
Do you want to say a word, since you've got the mic now, on the first question on U.S. appropriations and Belt and Road Initiative?
Well, I
economic
think
security?
on that one, and it's not to minimize the question, but you have to add everything together. I mean, it's not just about the Build Act, it's all the things that are done in the region. So I think and I highlighted, I think just on direct foreign investment in the region, trade in the region, the defense budget in the region, we add all those up, those are significant numbers. The Build Act is complementary to all of that. Some of these other agreements build on a very substantial commitment and presence.
Thanks. Yoshi Kato, mic's on.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. What you have laid out today is, I think, basically the extension and enhancement of strategy, national security strategy and national defense strategy laid out. But last night, Prime Minister Lee Hsien-loong pointed out the need for adjustment to accept a larger role and growth of China. In other words, the change of course. My question is, are you ready to make any adjustment to the strategy laid out in the national security strategy or national defense strategy in order to avoid the strategic phase out with China? Thank you.
Okay, I'll take 3 or 4 because we've got so many to get in. Should I take?
Let's pick these off.
You want to pick them off one by one?
How much do we have time?
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead then.
Well, I would just say that in terms of an adjustment to our strategy is about security and prosperity. So the only adjustment that we would make is to do more of it. In the National Defense Strategy, it talks very importantly about having a relationship on a military-to-military basis with China. My discussions with my counterpart and then more broadly are how do we enhance cooperation. My focus is to identify those areas where we can have ongoing dialogue. But it's more than dialogue. How do we work together? The intent is avoid a misunderstanding, avoid miscalculation. So strategies are built to, the underlying principle behind strategies are to make choices around critical resources. We've made those choices. We'll invest in those resources and commit to those timelines, but things are flexible. It's a dynamic world.
This is excellent. So we've got another dozen or so people, but I think we've got a good back and forth going. We'll take at least 6 or 7 more. Gordon Flake.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. You
From Australia.
emphasized your desire to have other countries in the region take more responsibility for the security of the region, both budgetarily and in terms of working together. What would you like to see other countries in the region do more of vis-a-vis North Korea? There seems to be an undiminished threat in terms of its nuclear weapons, in terms of its missiles and long-range missiles, and yet we don't hear an awful lot outside of Northeast Asia as to what you'd like to see the region more broadly do more of.
I think the first and foremost is enforcement of the UN security resolution. I'd really shift the question more towards where do we really want to see increased investment activity and cooperation. I would say it's in counterterrorism. I think there's significant work that we have to do there. And then, just as importantly, maritime domain awareness. And you know, when I think about the initiatives that we have put in place, how we intend to conduct exercises, the integration of our activity, those are really 2 critical areas that are vital to our collective future and the security architecture.
Francois Isbourg.
Yes, Mr. Secretary, you used the word trust several times during your speech, but you used it in a manner a bit different from Prime Minister Lee Hsien-loong yesterday. You were alluding to trust between partners, and he was alluding to the lack of trust as being at the heart of the China-US standoff, a face-off. And my question is the following. What is it that the US, if anything, can do for its part to build or rebuild trust with China? Or is it all up to China, and is lack of trust now so far gone that it is only about defense and deterrence? Is it that bad?
I think we're at a different meeting. I didn't think it was that bad. I haven't, is there a face-off? You know, I'll pick up the newspaper and it talks about a trade war. I haven't seen a trade war. There are trade negotiations that are ongoing. We're building relations with the Chinese military. So I'd be hesitant to talk about a face-off. There's always the risk of a face-off. I mean, I think that negotiations are always difficult. You have 2 large countries that will eventually resolve these issues. That's how these things work out. It's always difficult as you work through them. Trust is built over time, and that's what I referenced in my speech. And I shared this with General Wei last night. I gave him this beautiful book. It was his book, and it was about ship-to-ship transfers of oil in the area right near China. So this is an area where you and I can cooperate. Trust is built by working on projects and being shoulder to shoulder. It isn't done by conferences or by policies or by speeches. And you need to find areas in which we can grow. That's our strategy and the national defense strategy. And I'm very confident that maybe I'll say it this way. Part of trust building is also to recognize where we have differences and where we have disagreements. And so there are a number of them. I don't like when intellectual property is stolen. We have real issues with intellectual property theft, cyber attacks. There's a host of issues that we have to address. I mean, I think the discussion from last night on 5G is a very good example of where we have to understand how to build and develop trust. You know, when we're in the Department of Defense and we think about investing in a new, computer network or how to address telecommunications growth over time, and we look to a company like Huawei. Huawei is too close to the government. The integration of civilian businesses with the military is too close. You have China has national policies and laws where data is required to be shared. So when I look at that situation, that's too much risk for the department. We can't trust that those networks are going to be protected. Now, should that be an area that we sit down and have serious debates over, or should we put up walls? I'm an engineer. I like to solve problems. So, when we look at the United States or the Department of Defense, we're going to find areas where we have disagreements, and then we're going to work constructively on them. Freedom of navigation is another good example, right? So, I'm confident that we'll solve problems. It's done through cooperation first, but you can't ignore some of these serious issues that exist in this region.
An Ho Young, your mic is on.
Thank you, Dr. Chipman. My name is Ho Young-an. I'm president of University of North Korean Studies in Seoul. I wish to make 3 quick points. My first point is a welcome, and then welcome goes to Secretary of Defense, Mr. Shanahan. I used to be South Korea's ambassador to Washington, D.C. during the time of President Obama as well as during the time of President Trump. So you would understand it is with a special warmth that I'm extending to you as Secretary of Defense. I wish you best in this important and challenging time. My second point is an invitation. And the invitation is about North Korean nuclear issue. And this is one issue which has been extensively covered in this very solid speech by Secretary Shanahan. And between Shangri-La Dialogue of last year and this dialogue, then there have been no less than 2 meetings between President Trump and Chairman Kim Jong-un of North Korea. Before the second meeting, which was held in Hanoi, then there was much discussion about if we were going to have a big deal or a small deal. And what I said myself was that it doesn't matter whether it is going to be a big deal or a small deal. What is important is it must be the right deal. And then, of course, I'm just looking at you, and then there seems to be a question in your eye, which is, what do you mean by right deal? And then I cannot spend too much time on it, but at the same time, there's the reason why my second point is an invitation. My invitation is out there. Anyone who would be interested in discussing this issue, please come and then share your views with me. My third and last point, there is publicity for my university. As I said, my university is University of North Korean Studies, and as the name stands, it's a premier institution on the research and education of any and all issues related with North Korea.
Thank you. We've got that invitation, but I think the Secretary wants to talk to you about the right policy, so I'll hand over to the Secretary now.
Thank you, Dr. Chipman.
On the policy side there, my role in the Department of Defense is to be ready in the event diplomacy fails. My role in the Department of Defense is to enforce sanctions. And working with my counterparts in the Republic of Korea and Japan, we have the appropriate readiness, but we have full confidence in the ability to negotiate a fully denuclearized Korean peninsula.
Bonnie Glaser.
Thank you, Dr. Chipman and Secretary Shanahan. The other day, General Dunford said that U.S.-China military relations is not where it needs to be, and that military communication must be improved. And you have also referred to that today. And I wonder if you can elaborate on where this military communication has to be improved. Is the agreement that we have with China on securing safety in the air and at sea, is that working effectively? What are the things that we need to do in order to reassure the region that there won't be an unwanted conflict in their backyard? Obviously, you too recognize that they have that concern, as you noted in your prepared remarks, that competition does not mean conflict. So what is it that we need to do to strengthen military communication with China in order to prevent an accident or unwanted conflict?
I'm a big proponent of repetition, so lots of repetition. And the reason I put the book together for General Wei is a good opportunity for us to start to use that communication channel. And there are other venues and forums. And the discussion that we had is that leadership casts a long shadow, and we must show our teams how to do the frequent communication so that we can not just prevent incidents, but identify these opportunities where we can have cooperation. I think what General Dunford is speaking to, and it's the same view that I have, is there's lots of opportunity in the region, but if you're not communicating, you're missing out on opportunity. We want to pursue the upside and avoid the downside risk of misunderstanding and miscalculation. Good? Good.
Can I take two more?
How about one more?
All right.
What do you, let's do an informal poll.
I've got
I think they
28
said
people on my list, so I'll take two more.
Well, you can take a collection.
Okay, I'll take a couple and see where we get from that.
All right,
First,
okay.
from China, Major General Zhu Hu.
Yeah.
Major General, your microphone is on.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah.
I'm Major General Xu Hui, the Commandant of the International College of Defense Studies, National Defense University, China. Now, Mr. Secretary, all we know, you worked many decades for Boeing, which enjoys very good relationship with China as a partner. Recently, China-US relations looks not as good as it should be. Now, as the Secretary of Defense, how would you like to use your personal experiences accumulated in Boeing in improving this most important relationship in the world for a shared future of human destiny? Thank you.
Oh, that was a good question. Right? I think my experience from working at Boeing really carries over because China was our biggest customer and biggest competitor. And so you have to understand how to live in that duality. And competition really means playing by the rules. And when I think about the work that we have to do is let's establish the norms and the rules and play by them. You know, we're not talking about how do you make the world fair, because it's impossible to do that. It's let's be consistent and let's work to norms and rules. We have that opportunity. But we have to be able to communicate and cooperate. I bring the mindset that we can develop a constructive relationship, and then we can understand how we can compete in a constructive way. I mean, that's, at the end of the day, this is about growing the prosperity of the region. You know, we need security. Security underpins that, but it's about growing prosperity. It's not about conflict. It's not about building walls. This is about security. I'm confident that the opportunity exists, but it has to be grounded in norms and rules and communication, and we'll put that in place. All right.
All right.
Good?
Yep.
Let's end on that. That's perfect. What a high note. All right. Thanks,
The
everybody.
Secretary wants to conclude with that, and we want to thank him for that conclusion. Thank you very much indeed.